But we are so happy that you're spending a Wednesday in February with us on the big Texas Author Talk with Meg Gabbert, who I've known since 2017. Mag was the first or second person to teach at Writing Workshops Dallas when we were an in-person workshop here in Dallas. And so I've known Mag for a long time. I've respected her as a teacher and a writer, and it's really thrilling to have her on for her book this evening. And we're thrilled to have Seamus moderating from Los Angeles, if you consider that Los Angeles. But, you know, this is made possible every month with a grant from Humanities Texas. And we have been doing this since the spring of 2020. So we've been doing this for 4 years now. Of course, you know, at the start of the pandemic, David Samuel Levinson, he said, hey, let's get everyone together for a reading club, to talk about the craft of writing, maybe sometimes the business of writing, and let's celebrate authors that have some sort of connection to Texas. Either they lived here, they write about it, or they're out of the state now or somewhere. So David said, I got to introduce you to Alexandra Vandekamp, who is executive director down at Gemini Inc. And together we've just been doing this, co-hosting this now for 4 years. And we have a whole archive of these conversations on YouTube, both on the Gemini Inc. YouTube and also on the Writing Workshops YouTube. So thank you for being here tonight. Looks like people are here from all over. And we're just really excited about this conversation tonight between Mag and Seamus. And I'm going to hand it over to Alexandra Vandekamp, who's going to say some things about Gemini Inc. and then get us started.
Thanks, Blake. Yeah, I can't believe it's 4 years. Oh my God. But we've had a lot of fun, a great array of author conversations. And I think what we love the most is, you know, when the moderator and author know each other, it just adds like this extra fun element to it. So welcome. I just wanted to say briefly that Gemini Inc. is San Antonio's Writing Arts Center. We teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. Check us out at GeminiInc.org. Some people think we're a tattoo parlor. We're not, but we've actually been in existence for 31 years. And we just love bringing writers and readers together. So we're very excited to have Meg Gabbert here tonight with Seamus as our guest moderator. I'm going to introduce them a little bit and then get the heck out of the way so you can hear from them. Meg is our featured author. She's the author of Sex, Depression, Animals, just out from Mad Creek Books, or actually in 2023, which was selected by Kathy Fagan as the winner of the 2021 Charles B. Wheeler Prize in Poetry. She's also the author of previous chapbooks, The Breakup, which was selected by Kaveh Akbar as the winner of the 2022 Baltic Writing Residencies Chapbook Award, and the chapbook Minml Poems, out by Cooper Dillon Books 2020. Her awards include a Discovery Award from 92nd New York's Unterberg Poetry Center, a Pushcart Prize, and fellowships from the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, Idyllwild Arts, and Poetry at Round Top. Mag's work can be also found in some great poetry journals, the American Poetry Review, the Paris Review Daily, Copper Nickel, Guernica, and Poetry Daily, as well as elsewhere. She has an MFA from UC Riverside and a PhD from Texas Tech. She lives in Dallas, Texas, and teaches at Southern Methodist University. And there is no shortage of praise for this latest collection, Sex, Depression, Animals. Just one example is the award-winning poet Timothy Donnelly says, quote, Gabbert's poems leap off the page, fueled by nerve, passion, dazzling research, and one grief after another. Need drives her to question what it means to be a human, and a powerful poetic gift keeps spinning its answers into scorching music. Like so many sunbursts on the tongue. I love this book. And I think we're all going to love hearing her read from it. And then we're really thrilled to have Seamus Fay here as our featured moderator. They are a trans writer living in LA. Currently, they are the poetry editor at Hooligan Magazine and co-creative director at Rock Pocket Productions. Their debut poetry collection, which just came out, is Decompose, and it's out from Not Occult Media. His work has appeared in the American Poetry Review, Poet Lore, the Sonora Review, and others. They love to beat their friends at Mario Party, and they can be found at S. Fay Creates. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over my invisible mic, and I would love to let the conversation begin.
Thanks, Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having us. On top of all of that wonderful truth about Mag, she's also an incredible friend, a wonderful cat mom, and she can be found watching Lord of the Rings over there in Texas, as well as teaching and as well as being a very gentle but very, very moving spirit. And we're all lucky to have her in this world, let alone get to hear her talk today. So Mag, if you want to get us started by reading a few poems, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I gave myself a challenge for this event to kind of read pieces that I don't always read from the book, which is sort of exciting and different. Sometimes you get into that groove where there are particular pieces you return to time and again because they sort of are easy to read or read well or whatever. But this time I'm going with some different pieces. I'm going to read about 6 poems and then we'll just have a conversation. The first piece I'm going to read is one of the oldest poems in the book, or in terms of when it was written. It's called Baby, and it's also sort of central to the collection in a way because it deals in a not indirect way, I guess, with an abortion I had when I was 16, and sort of the fallout from that. Baby. I don't think about you in an iridescent way. I don't ever look for you in the night. I do not imagine your endlessness. When I think about you, I think about myself and of other real things like dawn on the crumpled sheet or the mountains, the balance between fear and believing in things. You are not a wish. You are a black and white photo of water hidden somewhere in my room. The next poem I'm going to read also deals some with adolescence. And so there's a bit of a thematic continuity here. And also, even though it's sort of a sad poem, it's also a sort of a list of some of my favorite things, which is fun to think about. It's called Gum, G-U-M, Gum. I used to love a boy who wrote graffiti. Loved iced tea, rooms filled with paintings. When I got sick, my mom would buy me a butterfly cocoon, hung from a stick, cradled on another one that looked like a wishbone. After a week or so, the butterfly would hatch, and I'd let it go. Snow days, nail polish, stories with predictable endings. Like waking up from a dream into a dream. I love knowing that some species of moths live off the tears of larger animals, that no 2 lions share the same pattern of whiskers. I love the way the lion cubs hide among the rocks. I love their whole and heavy eyes, their bodies kneeling at their meat. These days, the boy who wrote graffiti is a tattoo artist. He gave me a red poppy beneath my arm, and last week, he got married. I used to love wedding dresses with lace sleeves. I used to want to let a cheetah eat me as a demonstration of how much I loved them. I used to want to be on a SWAT team or be a mother by age 30. I used to own a little pink sculpture that looked like chewed gum. It might have been my favorite possession. I love gum, love the way it turns beneath my tongue. There aren't many poems in this collection that deal, whether directly or indirectly, with the event that the poem Baby describes, but one of those other pieces is this poem Egg. So it's also about my experience with abortion as a teenager, and also sort of navigating what it means to grow up in a religious family with a lot of moral values that made that process very difficult. One thing that I want to note, there are a few spots in this poem where I quote directly from the Bible, I think from the King James Version. And so I'll try to sort of give a pause or a way of letting you all know when I'm quoting from the Bible in those moments, so that you can understand the interchange between that voice and the voice of the speaker in the poem. If you were reading the poem on the page, that those parts are italicized. So the piece is called Egg. At Easter every year, we filled eggs with confetti. But first we would drain them until each one was light as breath when I held it. I used to find it almost funny that we ate them, little bright pools of beginnings with our bacon. Then we dyed the outsides, each vessel left empty, daffodil yellow, baby blue, sherbet peach, mint green like a nursery. I used to wonder whether Jesus ate meat, how his words became flesh, and why he always broke bread, saying, "This is my body." Once the eggs were all dry, we would wrap them with tissue to seal in the good news. They found the stone rolled from the tomb. Then one day at the clinic, my secrets were covered with a paper shroud too. And I didn't feel anything except light as confetti in a sterile white room. But when they entered, and a nurse said, "Breathe deeply," placed each of my feet up on 2 metal rings. They did not find the body. At least, that's how it seemed. There was only the sheet of thin butcher's paper left underneath. Why do you search for the living? Stained almost pink, with delicate petals. Among the dead, or little shells. Right, I just have a few more, and soon we'll be pivoting towards something maybe happier. But first, before we come to the happier pieces, it is a book called Sex, Depression, Animals, after all. Before the happier pieces, I'm going to read a poem called June. It's another poem that I wrote very early in the process of working on this book, and one that I never particularly thought would get much attention, but I shared this poem in June of the last summer, and people really responded to it in a way that surprised me on social media. June. I talk out loud to a dead person. The dead person says nothing. I tell the dead person that my tendons are threads of pain. My memories have grown fingers that pull threads. They make me float. They keep me at home. They make me watch the birds out my window, moving like smoke in the wind. Okay, I have 2 more. Both of them come from the section of the book that you can fairly easily identify as the animals section if you just sort of peruse the table of contents. And the first of these is fun to read. And it relates to, it's sort of fanciful in a way, a little bit magical realist for my own type of poem. And it relates to a particular kind of test that was performed back in the day in the United States, in which a rabbit would be injected with, I believe it was a woman's urine or something to that effect. And basically, in order to see whether the hormones of the rabbit respond, and based on that, And in order to discover that, you had to kill the rabbit. Based on that, you could tell whether the woman was pregnant or not. So this is a very sort of antiquated version of the pregnancy test, and it was called a rabbit test. So this poem is called Rabbit. The first one jumps out of my carrier, breaks its neck. Sweetly, the man I've been sleeping with buys another for me. When I set it on the bed to nap, it jumps too, easy. These rabbits must be terribly fragile, the man says, a new rabbit now tucked under each sleeve. At night, the rabbits begin nudging against my rib cage, nesting in the cups of my bra. They grow and kick. I snap them like plastic beneath my feet. There's a rabbit in the oven, probably asleep. The man and I no longer speak. We lie, hot and quiet under separate sheets, while rabbits crowd in beside me, still fattening, and more start to tumble out of the boxes, wrappers hidden underneath the bathroom sink. One floats in the toilet like the others, turning from white to pink. And the last piece I'm going to read for right now, before we have a bit of conversation, is a poem called Orangutan. Sadly, I'm hard pressed when people say, read, a happy, sweet, delightful poem from the book. I'm hard pressed to find one sometimes, but this particular poem is probably the happiest, or in a way most delightful. And it comes from a true story that occurred between me and my childhood best friend, Caitlin, when we went camping one year. But I also sometimes jokingly call it my basic white girl poem, because it just sort of goes through some of the delights in my life that are utterly predictable. Orangutan. It's New Year's Eve, and my life is predictable. I've been to Europe a couple times, done some sightseeing, castles mainly. I have eaten grilled cheese sandwiches and chips flavored with sour cream, watched vampire movies, and one time I did go camping in a teepee with my best friend after watching the sun rise out of the blue that morning. Later on, we took a bath in a clawfoot tub, facing opposite ways, nervously laughing every time our damp skin grazed the other, and we would say, "You're not real, not real, not real," which I guess was surprising and kind of celebratory, like a sudden orangutan, too big to shield himself with an umbrella of leaves, very Susie and Muppety, and even extraterrestrial or cerebral, up there in the trees.
Thank you so much, Meg.
Thank you.
I'm laughing because I feel like as poets, like we almost never have something happy to offer. And we all are always like, God, I've got to find something. Like I feel like it's a universal like poet struggle.
Yeah.
But my first question that I have for you sort of stems from like, I don't know if this happened to you, but with my book coming out very soon, I've been thinking about like how it came to be and like what I'm grateful for in order for making it happen.
Yeah.
So my first question for you is out of curiosity for that and for every poet. If you had a writing ancestry tree, who would its branches be made of?
Ooh, that's a really fascinating question and a good one. Something that I find really interesting about inspiration, at least for me and for poets who I talk to at length about these things, is how you can have poets who deeply inspire you, but that line doesn't always show up in your work necessarily, whose work is quite different from yours. And yet for some reason you're tinkering with the things that you see going on in those poems and sort of trying to work with new versions of those things in your own work. At the same time, I don't know, maybe some of what I would consider to be a type of lineage would make sense. One of the early books that I read that really spoke to me was Sharon Old's first collection, Satan Says. And that book definitely deals with a lot of the things thematically that my book deals with. So I can see the connection there for sure. And also maybe some of the more conversational type of direct voice and things like that. Dorothea Lasky is another poet whose work was extremely important to me as I first started in on the journey of taking poetry seriously, and her work remains extremely important to me. But the collection Thunderbird in particular, which came out, I think, in 2012, that was a formative time for me, and the way that Lasky's poems were eschewing punctuation and just sort of manifesting in this bizarrely organic way that was still so strange, was really powerful and meaningful to me. I mean, I think about this one poem all the time that was in that collection, a poem called Wild. And in it, she says something like, people try to make God human, but God is not human. He stares at you through the eyes of a bear and beats his terrible bearded chest and guffaws into the night. And I just, that wildness and that recklessness is something that I'm constantly striving toward. But at the same time, I feel like I'm more of a type A person. I'm more like precise. And so I'm always pushing myself to go further into the recklessness. And when I think about like some of the newer collections that really inform that too, I think about, for example, Diane Seuss's much lauded Frank Sonnets, right?
Yes.
Which is just absolutely a work of true, utter recklessness, but in the best and most creative, innovative way. Or I think about Victoria Chang's Obit.
Yep.
And just the riffing on those forms and the amazing things that come out of that exercise. You can tell that those books were just written in sort of like a fever pitch, you know? And man, that's what I want. You know, I want to be in it like that, just drilling through that vein. And I think that it takes so much practice and initially so much precision to get to a place where you can let go like that.
Absolutely. Well, okay. Great answer, and all of which like makes sense having read your work.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you'd read Lake for us.
Yeah, I would love to read Lake. This is actually one of the most, how would I say it? Most recent, newest poems that was written for the book. Like this poem was one of the last things I put into the final iteration of the manuscript. So it was written very close to the time when the book started to become a real thing. I should mention that it's inspired in part by a wonderful poem by Solmaz Sharif called a Vulnerability Study, which I encourage everyone to look at some point. And I think if you do read that poem and you read my own poem, Lake, that you'll see those little bits of echoing each other, dealing with the same kinds of subject matter, but going in different directions ultimately. So yeah, the poem's called Lake. You can't come from behind me anymore, because once I said it hurt. A plane floats outside the window like a fish in dark water. I only remember how to make two things out of paper, stars and boats. Every morning, by the time we wake up, the day's already broken. When my grandmother had run out of language, I folded a handful of stars as a gift for her, and she just swallowed them.
I love this poem so much. Something that I love about this book is you could really read it as a study of linguistics.
That's nice. Thanks.
Emotional linguistics as well as linguistics. Like all of the different ways we could look at a lake emotionally happen in those like very beautiful, very succinct couplets. So next question for you.
Yeah.
If this book had a soundtrack, what would be on it?
Ooh. Also, quick secret that it's kind of like children, right? With poems or anything that you put into a collection of work. Like you don't want to really disclose, but you do have favorites. I do, at least. I can't speak for everyone, but Lake is kind of one of my favorite poems too. Yeah, the soundtrack. This is a fascinating question to me, partly because I'm really interested in the way that people write or the writing process. And sort of a lot of folks I know will listen to music as part of the writing process. And then or go to a coffee shop, right? And want to be sort of among people or whatever. And for me, for whatever reason, kind of begrudgingly, the best thing I have found is like silence, real golden, utter silence. Like
No
with some
soundscape, just absolute silence.
yeah, like with some good noise canceling headphones on or something. And so I don't typically write with any type of soundtrack, if you will, but there are definitely artists and songs that maybe speak to the vibe of the book. Some of the first things that come to my mind are music that was central to me during my adolescence, because this book does, in a way, hinge upon that period of time in my life, my late teens and very early adulthood in particular, a time that I'm glad to have written about and hopefully not have to revisit in future collections. And so, for example, the biggest one that immediately comes to mind is the first album by The Used. Just, yeah, the box of sharp objects and the ballads in there, that whole album was extremely important to me at that time, and one that I would play on repeat. And it captures a lot of the mood for me and the complexity of that mood. So I would put, yeah, the first album by The Used. In a way, like people who know me well, who are watching this, are going to crack up because I'm kind of a broken record when it comes to like what my favorite music is. And it so deeply permeates like every aspect of my life. And I'm not that adventurous. Like I stick with the things that I love. So another hugely just formative album for me that to this day I listen to when I need to be kind of steeled against something is Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory. And I think that on the one hand, you could read my book and maybe find it to be sort of quiet in certain ways and definitely, reflective or meditative in certain ways. But at the same time, I think you could read it, and especially if you've had any kind of parallel experiences, or if you know me very well, then you know that there's also a deep simmering rage in it. And that's how I feel about Hybrid Theory, and that was always sort of an outlet for me to be able to release it. So yeah, Hybrid Theory is another that comes to mind, but then also some quieter stuff. Some Fiona Apple would probably go in there, some Sia. Yeah, more tender things, maybe the Garden State soundtrack, which my best friend who I read about in the poem Orangutan, she and I used to fall asleep listening to that soundtrack every time we had a sleepover for years. And so, yeah, those are other works that come to mind. But I do have to go back to that place of ultimately where the poems were born, in like my psyche. And in a way, that place persists in my brain. And similarly, those works of music remain equally important to me now, just as they were then. The last one I would throw in that's maybe a curveball, but also came to be important to me during my adolescence initially. The choral arrangements of Eric Whitacre. He does some really, really incredible things with dissonance in those arrangements, and some just really profound. For me, like if heaven had a sound, if I were maybe a denominationally religious person, and if God, had a sound or a music, it would sound like Eric Whitacre's music. And like songs, for example, like Cloudburst or When David Heard, or there's a gorgeous setting to Octavio Paz's poem, A Boy and a Girl, that just haunts me. And when I was an adolescent, I went to the Arts Magnet High School as a vocal performance major, and I was in the choir, and we performed many, many Eric Whitacre arrangements, which were notoriously difficult to pull off, and it afforded us the opportunity to travel to New York City and perform in amazing locations as a choir. But it also really changed my relationship to reflection and spirituality and sort of devotion.
I'm gonna need that playlist.
Okay, cool. Luckily, we're recording this.
Are you on Spotify?
I am not. I'm an Apple Music person, partly because I don't want people snooping upon my, because the thing is, I listen to things on repeat, gooftastically so, right? Like I'll choose a song and I might listen to that on repeat for like 3 weeks, anytime I'm listening to music. I don't need people to know how many times I've heard Third Eye Blind's God of Wine, The answer is embarrassing.
I mean, no one can tell like exactly how much you're listening. They'd have to like really be paying attention. But what's cool about it is if you did create a Sex, Depression, Animals playlist, like people could find it. Not that we support Spotify though, because they, amongst many other ways you can listen to music, do not pay musicians enough. So let it be known, I'm not supporting Spotify here, but if you had one on Spotify, I could look it up.
But we could support Sex, Depression, Animals on Spotify.
Right.
Hey, there's that.
There's
authors need it.
There's that. I was wondering if you would read Wedding.
Yeah. I would love to read Wedding. And again, like the theme here, which I find really fascinating. This is again one of the oldest poems that, like, I wrote this piece initially, I want to say toward the end of my MFA program. So a solid 5-6 years before the book was ever picked up. And I think that for folks who read the collection from front to back, you can see that there's a little bit of a difference in style and diction in this piece comparatively, but like the tone and the themes are the same. Wedding. Still simmering from the last sips of champagne, we stayed in the old boathouse beside the lake and began taking down decorations, unfastening, untying, unwinding each thing we'd assembled for your sister the day before. I followed every familiar gesture, the language of longtime friends. We only had the room until dawn, and I, your date in the absence of your spouse, helped undo any pieces that could be undone. First the tulle, once netting lavender light, gathered in ectoplasmic bouquets. Then the discarded stems of each sparkler. With mine, I'd streaked hearts as the bride stepped from the porch. You'd held the lit wand to your lips and pretended you would swallow the glow like a sun. We took the baby's breath, violets and bluebonnets from their vases, and scattered them in the lawn. We snuffed each candle out until nothing but smoke slinked toward the wood-planked ceiling. The moon poured its pale sheen, its light somehow a bright shadow. We shook the silver glitter from each tablecloth, watched the fabrics linger like water above us a moment, then let them fall to our bodies. We carried the altar out to the neighbor's truck bed. His headlights swayed to the west and diminished. No trace of ceremony left. We stepped from the airy hall to the banks of the slick, black lake. I stood, hungry, at its lip. I thought to immerse myself. I thought to push you in. The darkness began to become us.
Ugh. There are moments where like my roommate will get concerned because I will audibly react to what I'm reading, like, and sometimes yell, and he'll be like, "Are you good?" And I'll be like, "You held the lit wand to your lips and pretended you would swallow the glow like a sun? Are you serious?" And he'll be like, "Yes, great line, great line," but he'll literally think that I'm like unwell. Which
I love that you're in there professing like that.
oh
It
yeah.
gives me great joy.
Oh yeah, always, always. And I'll be like, "Listen to this." He'll be like doing something. I'll be like, "Listen to this." And, like, but this poem has so many beautiful moments for me. And as like somebody who also works in film, like this poem could be a short film. As well as I love prose poems. The girls have differing opinions on prose poems. Not all of the girls agree,
Yeah.
but I love prose poems, and a lot of us love prose poems out here. I think people are scared of their power, and this poem in particular might be one of the reasons why people are scared.
Well, that's nice of you. And spoiler alert, my second manuscript is chock full of prose poems. So, I mean, I do think that they help you get toward a certain kind of recklessness, right? For one thing. Also, funny aside, that poem too is based on a true story. With one of my dearest, oldest, closest friends. And I remember when he first read the book, he texted me and he said, "You thought to push me in? Question mark, question mark, question mark."
I love that. And you were like, "And?"
Truth. But I didn't do it.
You thought. We have lots of thoughts. Everybody has lots of thoughts.
That's right. That's right. Exactly right.
And good on you. And good on you had you pushed him in, TBH. So my next question for you is sort of thinking about how like the book is sort of like a landmark or like a pin along the journey on your like road as a writer.
Yeah.
And so I think you've experienced my like New Year's / birthday questions. So I think a lot about like what we're leaving behind and what we're bringing with us a lot, because I like to personally like mark that for myself. So my question for you is, what poetics did you leave behind in this book, and what are you taking with you?
Yeah, a very appropriate question following our recent conversation. So, I'm definitely taking with me an interest in playing more with sort of recklessness, and especially with the prose form, but also with visual forms. So, for example, there's a series in the collection called the Breakup, series of sections in the collection called the Breakup that are, if you see them, a sort of visual form, a type of erasure, a form rather of erasure that I invented, where you take a single sentence of your own, copy and paste it below however many times, and then use the feature of changing the font to white to erase, elements as the lines repeat below, so that you can create sort of a new narrative. I definitely play with a lot of visual forms too, and do some sort of new experimental work in the new manuscript in progress, tentatively titled "Why on Earth?" But at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, on this sort of much less meticulous end, play with not just prose poems, but broken up prose poems. So they have sort of stanzaic breaks, but not linear breaks. They don't break the lines. I'm very interested in that collection in ekphrastic poems. So one that I sometimes will read from this collection as a departure point into the new collection, which is interesting because I never thought of it this way at the time. It was written kind of in the middle of the process of this book, but the poem David, after Michelangelo and after his sculpture David, in particular, I have a number of poems that deal with Michelangelo, but also ekphrastic poems in general in the new collection. So for those of you who are not sure yet what that means, ekphrastic poems are just sort of poems that are written with specific works of visual art as their inspiration point. And then there are also a lot of poems that are interested in sort of what's in the zeitgeist right now, space-time, quantum mechanics, quantum entanglement, and the idea of sort of what's real, what's not real. And what does it mean for us to forge connections between each other? And I think that some of those things begin to manifest a lot in this book because I'm very interested already in duality and multiplicity and trying to create many layers of meaning where the poem, on the one hand, means exactly what it says, and you shouldn't ideally have to know any more than that in order to sort of understand it. But on deeper levels, there are these additional interpretations, these additional ways of reading and layers of meaning. And none of those things are mutually exclusive, but they sort of just accumulate upon each other.
And on top of the reader always, of course, reading through the lens of who they are as a person, which is infinitely different from you. Absolutely,
absolutely. And that too, that idea of sort of perspective and context and what it means to be situated, you know, those are things that I'm playing with a lot as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I speak for everyone when I say we're all very excited for book 2 as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So I've got one more question and one more request from you, and then we can get to our audience Q&A. So my last question before I request is if you could put this book in the hands of anyone in history, like anyone over time, whose hands would they be?
Dang. Okay. I'm glad that you threw that first before the poem request so I can be like secretly marinating on this for a second.
Okay.
May I marinate for a second?
You may marinate. And the next request from me, let me just doubly make sure, is lace.
Lace. Okay, great. So yeah, I'm marinating.
You marinate.
And the thing is, I want to answer it because I'm also going to be distracted if I try to like read this poem and I'm still thinking about it. I think that you'll know what I'm talking about, Seamus, and many of you who are listening will know what I'm talking about if you are writers. It's very hard to separate your heart from what you're working on currently. And so my answer would be sort of, in a way, more geared toward the work that I'm doing now, but also in a way geared toward like the core of my interests and my heart and my questions about what it means to be human. So I think my initial impulse, and who knows, I'm gonna probably, Seamus, I'll probably text you at like 3 o'clock in the morning, Dallas time, and be like, this is actually who it was. I didn't think of them. Bah! But my initial impulse, the first person that comes to my brain is Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. Okay, so lace. Lace is meant to sort of look lace-like. For those of you who don't have the book, it's sort of prosy looking, but then it has these slashes to indicate moments of rest, sort of like a moment where you would pause and take a breath, like a line break. And so those are meant to sort of replicate stitch work in the poem, and to make it look a bit like lace. And this is one of quite a few poems in the collection that is partly meditating on etymology, the root of a word, where it comes from. And so if you were reading the book on the page, you would see there are a number of phrases that are italicized, and sometimes that's because they come from the etymological dictionary of, this is the sort of ancient history of the evolution of this word and where it originated. Lace. A piece of cord used to bind or close openings. The satin corset I wore to a frat party. Flimsy stitches, paper snowflakes, trimmed skirted legs. A man leaning in whispering, "Do you shave everything?" The root is shared with Old French for ribbon or string, with Latin for snare, with English lasso. Some men I know still like playing games, like pickup, linked elbows, plastic cups arranged in shiny bouquets, like every lip touching so it's easy to aim, drinks all mixed up, eyes blackened, blurry, shadows, sheets. In the 1590s, to be laced meant beaten or lashed, as in patterns on skin. A placeholder for feminine, as in frilly, undone easily. Do I have to say please? Ripped panties, the seeds of Queen Anne's lace, eaten to prevent pregnancy. Every man who's ever asked me, "Do you want it?" Plucked petals on a daisy. Every pain I could have named, avoided. Every time I said, yes, I did. And it's one of many poems, I should say, that's interested in the act of defining, as you can hear when I read it, right? It's sort of an exercise in defining the word in these multifaceted ways.
Yes, that's one of the reasons why I say this book could be read as a study of linguistics, is because there are so many moments where you as the reader walk away with more questions about those words and spend more time thinking about those words and what those words mean to you, lace being one of them. I also love, I think often prose poems with backslashes are often things that I'm very cautious about, because I think sometimes people do them for no reason, and I hate it when people do them for no reason.
Yeah,
but
everything should have a reason, yeah.
Of course. And there are very few poems I can name that I'm like, this is an example of how to do this, and this is one of them.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, of course. I will make some room for our audience Q&A. I can't say enough. Like, if you don't have a copy of Sex, Depression, Animals, you should grab one. It's one of my favorites, and it's a book that I keep in my frequently referenced section because I have to go grab it because I thought of something or wanted to review a poem or was talking about it. So definitely pick it up if you're in the audience. We've got one question here. I'm curious about the second part of it. First part is, what is your writing process? And the second is, are there parts of your creative process that you are impatient with, either yourself or the work?
Such a good question. Thank you, Sherry. Absolutely. I'm not what I would consider to be a prolific writer, although I have a very devoted practice and I spend a lot of time writing. That does not result ultimately in a lot of poems. And that's okay. And I know many, many incredible writers who are very prolific and who don't have to go through the same seemingly tedious process that I go through to get the same level of work, and that's okay. But for me, that's what it sort of requires. And so my process is one that is multi-phased and also very fragmented. I will almost never sit down and draft a poem end to end in any type of way that would ever be recognizable when you look at the final form of the poem. I do a lot of research, I take a lot of notes, and I will take sort of fragmented field notes as well about sort of the theme or the topic or the narrative that I'm turning over in my mind that I know is like a centerpiece of the poem. But then I also have like a running list of sort of orphaned ideas, images, lines, bits of research, all kinds of things, stuff that I've cut from other drafts of poems, stuff that I just sort of randomly wrote in my notes app one day and didn't know what to do with, you name it. And so a lot of the time, part of my process involves going through that and finding bits of kinetic energy, as I would call it, between the thing that I'm working on and something unexpected there. Because the whole point for me is that element of surprise. And in a way, to get at that, I have to trick myself. I have to come at it in a completely different way. I can't just be like, oh, what would I not expect? And let me write that here now. You know, so I'll go through that document and some other things. And it's this very patchwork, fragmented process. Almost none of my poems that have been published have fewer than 25 saved drafts in my computer. And my process is one that begins longhand in notebooks. And I go through a few different rounds of revision before I ever put something even in the computer. Because a lot of the time frankly, it doesn't turn out to be viable and I have to just set it aside. And so it never makes its way to the computer at all. So that's the most succinct way of talking about my process, and also of just affirming that absolutely there are things that frustrate me about it, because I can't make myself a more prolific writer without making myself a worse writer. Yeah.
Did you know that when you write something physically, because you're going from left to right, you're engaging both the left and right side of your brain?
I did not.
I can't really, I mean, for scripts and for short stories, I have to type them most of the time because, well, at least for scripts, it's unfeasible to write them.
Sure, yeah.
But in general, with poems, I'm the exact same way. I have to write it in a notebook first. And then my friend was like, oh, that's because it flows more freely because you're using your whole brain.
Yeah, yeah. Also, that for me, actually a big part of my process, strange as it may sound, is simply like I'll write the draft of the poem and then I'll look and I'll see the edits I want to make. And it's the physical act of rewriting the draft with those edits.
Oh, yeah.
And then iterating that over and over again that somehow does something for me cognitively. And there's, I teach a class on the creative process and there's research behind what this does, but it'd be much too deep and boring to go into now. But there is something to be said for just that act of physically writing things down and iterating it in that way too. Yeah.
100%.
So I see one more question from Kellen.
Yes. So when and how did you find the courage to take poetry seriously?
It's a really good question, and I love this question in particular because in a way it actually connects back to the big Texas author talk. I did not even understand that the world of contemporary poetry existed, much less know what that looked like or have any investment in it until I was an undergraduate student in college. And I had the amazing opportunity by just sheer chance and fortune that as a college student at Trinity University in San Antonio, I studied with Jenny Brown, former Texas Poet Laureate, and just one of my favorite people in the world to this day. And I got into one of her classes as an underclassman when I think you kind of weren't supposed to. And I fell in love and I became obsessed. And I was not particularly talented at it. And I say that in all seriousness, not just to be humble, but it was something that I was so obsessed with that I was just determined to kind of like invest everything and work tirelessly. And I had the opportunity, the reason I say this connects back to the big Texas author talk is because I had the opportunity, I think it was a couple years ago now, to serve as the moderator for Jenny's time as when she was the Big Texas author, discussing one of her most recent books. And one of the things that I respect and love most about Jenny, she was in a lot of ways like a parent and a sister and a friend to me through my college years. And it's rare to really forge that kind of relationship, even though I know that now as an educator, even though there are many students who I care deeply about and feel close with in some respect. But she remains like that important to me. And one of the things that I especially respect about her is that she didn't sugarcoat, right? And so she would be like, yeah, I see that you're obsessed, and that's awesome. And you're making a lot of progress. But like when I asked her, you know, would you write me some recommendation letters for MFA programs? She said, absolutely, of course I will. But I don't think you're going to get in because you don't revise. You don't take that seriously. You think that you write something and it's going to come out perfect. And that is not ever the case. And like, I needed to hear that. She wasn't being cruel at all. She was truly, you know, being a loving and helpful presence in my life when she said that. And I needed to hear it. And it changed everything for me. And I was really fortunate that I got into many of the MFA programs I applied to, and I had the opportunity to push it further. But that fundamentally changed my entire process, and I've never gone back. Like I've only pushed deeper into the tedious tinkering and revising and overhauling and demolishing, and all of those things are thanks to her. And I can't explain what sort of gave me the courage, right? Because of course, no one, the reality is no poet is ever going to look at you and say, yes, you're so talented that you can absolutely make a killing off of this and feed and support yourself and a family and anything else, right? Because it's like, you can be the best poet in the world and potentially not do those things.
Yeah.
You can win the dang Nobel Prize and potentially not do those things.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to make those promises to you. And so ultimately, the thing that I think gave me the courage, silly as it sounds, was just my obsession. But also knowing that there were writers who were the real deal, who cared about me and supported me and were willing to mentor me. Yeah.
That's so interesting to know also, because I know you as a fantastic editor. Like that's one of the ways in which I know you. And I think there's sort of this youth about that whole, like, I don't need to edit thing. It's a very young thing. And I think a lot of early writers have that, where it's like, why would I edit? It's perfect.
Yeah. I call it secret genius syndrome. And like so many of us have it. So I'm not here to diminish anybody, because I certainly came in with that. That's the moral here. But like, when you haven't read that much, then of course you don't know what is or is not innovative, you know. And when you've taught, in my case, you know, now for 10 years at the college level, you learn that, oh, right, when your students first discover poetry and first get passionate about it, they're all writing essentially the same poem. And it's earth-shattering and life-changing for them because they don't know anything else. You know, suddenly they've discovered poetry, right? And they're writing the type of poem that many initial novice poets will write. And that's where you have to start. But the question is, are you willing to get into the grind? Are you willing to you know, make the hard decision that it's not just about how I feel? Like if I want to be a poet, if I want to be at large, then it's actually how it affects my reader. And in order to understand that, I need to understand the domain, period. And every trick that's been pulled, you know, every play that's been made up to this point, to the best of my ability.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I always say, like, you cannot chime into the conversation if you're not listening.
Yes, 100%. And you certainly aren't going to be listened to as a part of the conversation if you're not listening. And if people know that you're in your own head.
Yeah. So we're nearing time. Alexandra, do we have time for one more question, or should we wrap it on up here?
Let's just do one more. I'm madly typing in quotes from your conversation into the chat. Yeah, just one more. We'll wrap it up, Seamus. That would be great. Yeah.
All right, we've got a question from Margaret C here. For me, writing poems is a way I watch myself growing before my eyes. Can you relate to this? And is there a way you can describe what growth you've uncovered from beginning poems to final poems?
Yeah, I really love this question. There's a concept that I refer to as the discovery zone when I talk about writing poems with my students. And what I'm trying to say when I refer to the discovery zone is the fact that a poem is not going to do its job in an effective way if after you've written it, it says what you planned for it to say. You absolutely must discover something new via the creative process of writing the poem itself. Otherwise, it's predictable, because if you knew what it was going to say, then guess what? I, a seasoned reader, also know what it was going to say. And so, and I use the term the discovery zone as like this loving reference to this bizarro place I used to play as a kid that had like a giant slice of cheese that you could crawl through the holes of, and a weird little dystopian fake grocery store with all plastic grocery supplies that you could shop in. And it was like surreal and bizarre in exactly the ways that a poem should be. So you have to enter the discovery zone, and you know when you're hitting that flow, and you know when you're not once you've gotten to the point where it's happened to you before. And you have to be willing to follow the poem there and to let go of whatever plans you had otherwise. And I would just say that an excellent source on this is there's a wonderful interview with Jericho Brown that was published in the Bennington Review years ago that's still available online. And in it, one of the questions he was asked was, what do you have to say to folks who are writing very explicitly political poems these days? Do you have any thoughts on that? What Jericho kind of said is something to the effect of, the trouble with writing very political poems is that in today's political climate, people tend to have very concrete ideas about where they stand and what kind of message they want to convey. And in a poem, you have to enact a kind of transformation, and you have to go past that dark edge into a place of the unknown. And most people aren't really prepared emotionally, psychologically, to make the kind of discovery in a political poem that would allow the piece to transcend the predictability and to do something miraculous. And because a lot of the time that discovery requires some discomfort and some acknowledgement of complicity and some deep reckoning that goes way beyond the work of writing a poem. And so essentially, you know, what he said is, yeah, when you write a good political poem, that's amazing. But damn, it's hard, because there's this barrier that we are so afraid to cross, and poems demand that we cross it.
Wow, great answer.
Thank you. This has been so fun. This has been such a great conversation.
This has been so cool. Yeah, well, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Mag, and this has been so much fun, and I love talking to you about poems. So thank you for allowing us to do that, and I'll hand it back over to Alexandra and Blake.
Sure, no, thanks. Seamus, I think you win the prize for the best questions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were great. Well, this was wonderful. I'm waiting very happily through your amazing book of poems. So everyone buy Sex, Depression, Animals. We put some links in the chat. Really mesmerizing, riveting work.
Thank you.
And this is one thing we love to do, just have great conversations about writing, the world of writing, and then the pieces themselves. So thank you everyone for joining us. Mag, thank you so much. Seamus, thank you so much. This was kind of like, a treat for me to sit back and just listen. And we look forward to seeing you next month which I can't believe is already March. And just tune in to the Big Texas Read. We will have this most likely posted on YouTube fairly soon on the Gemini website and writing workshop stylist. So feel free to re-experience it. And I'm babbling on, and I'm going to let everyone go.
Thank you so
Matt.
much.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.